Nathaniel threw the party. Mason just fixed the freezer once. Nobody in that room knew which one of them the building actually belonged to. The Copper Fork reopened on a Friday night in October. New paint on the walls, new signage out front. A line of black SUVs waited outside like they were part of the decor. Nathaniel stood by the door in a charcoal suit, shaking every hand twice. He'd rented the whole back patio for the night. String lights, a jazz trio, a photographer nobody remembered hiring. Mason came in through the side entrance, out of habit. 9 years of walking into restaurants through the kitchen door will do that to a man. He wore the same navy jacket he always wore to these things, not because he owned nothing better, because he never saw the point. Somebody pressed a glass of champagne into his hand. He held it. He didn't drink it. His eyes drifted toward the kitchen doors the second he walked in. Old reflex. 20 years of listening for the wrong sound in a room like this. "You're the cooler guy, right?" a woman near the bar asked him. "Something like that," Mason said. She laughed and turned back to her friends before he finished the sentence. By the end of the night, one of them would go home and check a number neither of them had ever said out loud in front of the other. Mason didn't know that yet. He just knew the compressor hum in the kitchen sounded a half step off. He filed it away and kept moving through the crowd. Renee found him near the window, arms crossed, watching the room work. "You look like you're on the clock," she said. "I am," Mason said. "Just not the job they think I'm on." She didn't ask what he meant. Not right away. That was the thing about Renee. She let a sentence sit until it was ready to open on its own. Nathaniel worked the room like it was the whole meal. New watch. Gold face. Heavy on the wrist. He held his arm a little too long when he reached for a handshake. "Had it flown in from a guy in Miami," he told a table of investors. "Same guy who set me up with the Escalades tonight, rented, all 4 of them. Nobody at the table knew that but him." "We're not just a restaurant anymore," he said, loud enough for the patio to hear. "We're a brand." "This is phase 1, someone clapped. Someone else raised a glass. He talked about expansion, a second location, maybe a third by next spring. "Merchandise," he said. "A show, maybe." He wasn't ruling anything out. An investor asked him what the numbers looked like. "Strong," Nathaniel said. "Real strong. I'll have my guy send a deck." He didn't say who his guy was. He never did. Somebody asked about the kitchen renovation, the new hood system, the walk-in cooler. "Best equipment money can buy," Nathaniel said. Only way to do it. He didn't mention who financed it or how. He just moved to the next table, the next handshake, the next round of applause. The words moved fast, the way they always did with him. Growth, vision, momentum. None of them landed on anything you could actually hold. A server slipped past him with a tray, and for a second his smile dropped. "Tell them we'll call them Monday," he said quietly, not to the table. To someone near the kitchen, someone Mason couldn't see. Whoever it was nodded and walked off fast. Nathaniel turned back around, and the smile came right back on. "Where was I?" he said. "Right." Phase 1, near the bar. A young cook leaned toward another and lowered her voice. "Marchetti's called again today," she said, "about the produce account. 3rd time this month," the other one said. They both went quiet when a server walked by. Nobody at the party heard that but them, and Mason, who happened to be standing close enough and never once looked over. Mason found a spot near the kitchen door and stayed there. Not hiding, just close to what he understood. The compressor hum from the walk-in reached him even through the music. A half step off, like he'd noted earlier. Not urgent, just off. He caught himself counting the beats anyway, out of habit, like counting someone's pulse without meaning to. A server offered him a shot of something dark and expensive. "I'm good," Mason said, and set his untouched champagne down on a passing tray instead. He didn't drink much at these things. Never had. He watched the room the way he watched a kitchen before a job, where the pressure was, where something might be about to fail. Habits don't clock out just because you put on a jacket. An older man Mason recognized from a job 2 summers back walked over, beer in hand. "Mason Wells," he said. "Didn't expect to see you at something like this." "Nathaniel's an old client," Mason said. "Cooler broke down on him once. Bad week for him." "Small world," the man said, and laughed. "You still driving that same old van, huh?" Mason smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't answer the question. "Still runs," he said. The man laughed again and wandered off toward the bar, satisfied with an answer that wasn't really one. Mason looked down at his jacket sleeve for a second, at nothing in particular. Then back up at the room. Renee caught his eye from across the patio and tilted her head, a question without words. He gave her the smallest shake of his head. Not yet. She went back to her conversation, patient the way she always was. Somewhere behind him, near the kitchen pass, a compressor kicked on and settled into a steadier rhythm. Mason's shoulders dropped half an inch, like something in him had checked a box without asking. Nobody else in that room would have noticed the sound change at all. Nathaniel found Mason near the kitchen door around 10. He had a drink in each hand and an audience trailing behind him. "There he is," he said, loud enough for the group to turn. "My favorite repairman." A few people laughed before they even knew why. "Still fixing freezers for a living, huh, Mace?" Nathaniel said, grinning. "Man, respect. Honest work." He clapped Mason on the shoulder, hard, the way you'd clap someone you didn't think could hit back. The group laughed again, softer this time, checking Mason's face for permission. One woman looked away, a little embarrassed for him. Renee, across the patio, went still. Mason didn't argue. He didn't correct him. He just looked at Nathaniel for a second too long and said, "Somebody's got to keep the place cold." That got a real laugh, the kind that breaks tension instead of building it. Nathaniel grinned wider, pleased with himself, and turned back to his audience. Anyway, like I was saying, Phase 1, Mason reached into his jacket pocket and checked the time on his phone. Not because he had somewhere to be, because he had somewhere quieter to think. He put the phone back and looked toward the kitchen doors again. Behind them, 9 years of invoices sat in a filing cabinet nobody at this party had ever seen. Nobody here would have believed what half of those invoices actually said. Renee crossed the patio and stood next to him, close enough that her shoulder touched his arm. "You okay?" she asked, quiet, just for him. "I'm fine," Mason said. "He's not wrong. I do keep the place cold." She studied his face for a second, the way she always did when a sentence wasn't finished yet. "That's not all you do, though," she said. "No," Mason said. "It isn't." He didn't explain further. Not there. Not at a party with string lights and a rented Escalade parked out front. Some things you only say at your own kitchen table, late, after the dishes are done. The band started a slower song, and the crowd thinned toward the bar. Mason stayed by the door a little longer, listening to a compressor nobody else could hear. Then he found Renee's coat, and they left before the toasts started. Mason didn't say much on the ride home. Renee let him have the quiet. She always did after nights like that. The van still smelled the way it always did, coolant and cardboard and an old rag under the seat. 18 years old, high mileage, paid off a decade ago. He liked driving something he didn't owe anyone a payment for. He took the long way home, the way he always did, past a stretch of small storefronts on Delaware Avenue. A grocery, a diner, a little Italian place with a hand-painted sign out front. He looked at each one a beat longer than a man just driving past should. He wasn't checking their compressors anymore. Hadn't needed to, most of them, for years now. At the light on 5th, Renee glanced over. "You're doing the thing," she said. "The looking thing, old habit," Mason said. "That's not what that is," she said, and left it there. He didn't argue. Back at the party, when he'd checked his phone, he hadn't really been checking the time. He'd been running a list in his head, the way he did most nights without meaning to. 9 addresses, 9 compressors. 9 quiet arrangements nobody at that party had ever heard of. 12 years of it now. 12 years of showing up, fixing what needed fixing, and never once explaining what he actually owned when he walked out the door. Nobody asked. Not once. People ask a repairman what's wrong with the cooler. Nobody ever asks a repairman what he owns. That used to bother him a little, back when he started. It didn't anymore. Quiet had turned out to be useful. He pulled into his own driveway a few minutes later, the porch light on the way Renee always left it. Inside, the house was small, tidy, nothing that would turn a head at a party. No new watch on the counter. No rented car in the driveway. He sat behind the wheel a second before getting out, the engine ticking as it cooled. 12 years of nobody asking what he actually owned. 12 years of being the guy who fixed the freezer, nothing more, as far as anyone at those parties knew. He used to think that would wear on him eventually. Tonight, watching Nathaniel work a room that didn't know what it was standing on, it felt like the whole point instead. It started 12 years ago, with a couple who couldn't afford him. They were opening their first place, a small diner 2 blocks off Main, and the walk-in cooler they needed ran more than they had. Mason quoted the job. They went quiet on the phone for a second, like the number didn't sound real. "We can't do that right now," the husband said. "Maybe next year." Mason sat with that for a few days. Then he called back with a different offer. He'd buy the equipment himself, install it at his own cost, and they'd pay him a set amount every month instead, less than a bank loan would run them. He'd own the cooler. They'd own the restaurant. Simple as that. They took the deal. Mason wrote it up himself. 2 pages. Nothing fancy. No investors. No pitch deck. Just a lease on a compressor. He didn't tell anyone what he'd done. It didn't feel like a strategy. It felt like helping a couple keep their doors open. 6 months later, another owner across town couldn't afford a new system either. Mason offered the same deal, then did it again the next year, and the year after that, whenever the right situation came along. He never called it an investment. Renee started calling it that years in. Mason just called it renting them the cold. By now there were 9 of them, scattered across the city, each one a small, unglamorous monthly payment that showed up whether Mason was thinking about it or not. 300 here, 400 there, one as high as 600 at a busy little seafood place downtown. None of them alone would turn a head. 9 of them together did something else entirely. He kept the paperwork in a plain filing cabinet in his shop, nothing locked, nothing hidden, just never mentioned, because nobody ever asked the right question. Restaurants change hands more than people think. Owners sell. Leases get signed over. New names go up on old buildings. Mason's agreements were tied to the equipment, not the person running the kitchen. A new owner inherited the lease along with the walls and the tables, usually without ever meeting the man whose name was actually on the paperwork. One of those 9 addresses was closer than a mile from where the party was happening that night. It was closer than that. Mason hadn't thought about it once, standing there in his navy jacket, listening to a compressor he already knew the sound of. The Copper Forks kitchen sat on a lease Mason had signed 9 years before Nathaniel ever walked into that building. Back then, it was a small bistro, run by a woman named Carol, who couldn't afford a new walk-in cooler any more than that young diner couple could. Mason made her the same offer he'd make 8 more times over the years. He'd own the cooler. She'd own the restaurant. Carol's place didn't make it. 2 years later, she sold the lease and walked away. The next owner lasted 18 months. Then Nathaniel took over the space, inherited the walls, the tables, and a working walk-in cooler that came with the building, and never once asked who actually owned the compressor humming behind the kitchen doors. The service contract got folded into his overhead, a line item his accountant paid without a second look, made out to a name nobody at that party would have recognized: Wells Cold Air Systems. Mason had known this for 6 years and never said a word about it. Not out of spite. It just never seemed like his business to bring up. At home that night, Renee found him at the kitchen table, laptop open, the porch light still on outside. "What are you smiling at?" she asked. He turned the screen toward her. 9 line items, 9 addresses, $9,400, give or take, landing in an account every single month, on top of everything the shop itself brought in. "That's the seafood place," he said, pointing. "That's the diner from the beginning. And that one," he tapped the screen. "That one's the Copper Fork." Renee went still. "Tonight's Copper Fork?" "Tonight's Copper Fork," Mason said. She sat down across from him slowly. "He called you a repairman in front of 40 people. He's not wrong," Mason said. "I do fix the freezer. I also happen to own it." Renee laughed, quiet and surprised, the kind of laugh that comes out before you decide to let it. "The van," she said. "That guy asking about the van still runs," Mason said, and almost smiled. The old van sitting paid off in the driveway had never been the whole story. It was never supposed to be. Somewhere between a woman named Carol and a man in a rented Escalade, a walk-in cooler had quietly become worth more than either of them ever guessed out loud. $2,100,000, near enough, sat behind that number on the screen. Nobody at the party would have believed it. Nobody at the party had asked. 4 months later, Mason drove past the Copper Fork on a Tuesday night, and the lights were off early. Not closed for the night early. Closed, the kind of dark that has a for-lease sign behind it eventually. He didn't know the details, only what the neighborhood always seemed to know before anyone official did. Suppliers who stopped delivering. A landlord who stopped waiting. He didn't feel good about it. He didn't feel bad about it either. It wasn't his business, the restaurant part. His part was still humming quietly behind a door that would open for someone new before long, under some other name, on some other night. Whoever leased that kitchen next would inherit the walls, the tables, and a compressor with his name on the paperwork. They'd probably never ask about it either. That was fine. That was sort of the whole arrangement. Renee asked him once, not long after, if it ever bothered him, being the guy nobody clocked. Mason thought about it for a while before he answered. Nathaniel wanted everybody in that room to know exactly what he had, he said. "I just wanted the cooler to keep running." He didn't say it like a lesson. He said it the way a man says something he's actually lived, which is a different thing entirely. The van still starts every morning at 6, the shop still opens at 7, and somewhere across the city, 9 compressors keep humming along, unnoticed, unbothered, quietly paying for a life nobody at that party ever saw coming.